Hello and welcome to MetaNights. I'm Loku, a collector of stories, where we tell your story.
In the spring of 2003, I was in the second semester of my freshman year. One day, a classmate from high school came to our school to play with me, and she said, "Do you know, there is an outbreak of an infectious disease in the South, and if you catch it, you will die." That was the first time I heard about SARS. Not long after that, the news started to report the epidemic publicly. Our school was closed, and no one was allowed to leave the campus. As of April 28, 26 provinces reported the epidemic, including 96 new cases in Beijing, 20 medical personnel, 3 deaths, and 149 new suspected cases.
At that time, all kinds of rumors were circulating. Some said that banlangen was effective, and some said that rice vinegar was effective. Everyone went to the supermarket to buy. But in fact, the number of people infected in Shenyang, the city where I went to school at that time, was not very high. At that time, according to official statistics, the city with the highest number of SARS-infected people in mainland China was Beijing. At that time, the central government approved the emergency support for the prevention and treatment of SARS in Beijing, and 1,200 medical personnel were quickly deployed to support the establishment of a SARS hospital in Beijing. Wu's workplace, Huaxiang Hospital, is a township hospital in Beijing. In order to have more room for advancement, Wu applied for an internship at Peking University People's Hospital before the SARS outbreak.
My name is Wu. I am 43 years old, and I was an internist in Huaxiang Hospital before SARS. I feel very lucky that the learning atmosphere at Peking University People's Hospital is also very good. At that time, I felt that every day was very meaningful, and I was very happy, as if I was warm from inside to outside every day. I felt very excited about my internship there, and the ignorant were fearless, so I didn't feel dangerous at that time. In February 2003, I joined the emergency medicine department. At that time, the atmosphere was already very tense, because I knew that there was already an infection in Guangzhou, and many interns were infected. At that time, I thought, how can I be so stupid and how can I be infected? What I heard at that time was that the Chaoyang Dongzhaimen area was closed or something, and then we were trained to tell you that when you see a patient with fever, you have to ask him if he has a history of exposure. You have to give him what the minimum blood phase, what chest x-ray these tests, then feel a little nervous. On April 7, 2003 at 8 a.m., I finished my night shift and went home to rest. So I didn't know that the first SARS patient had just been diagnosed at Peking University People's Hospital on that day. We routinely have a case discussion every Tuesday, and I especially cherish this opportunity. I think I can learn a lot every time, so I was quite torn between going and not going. My boyfriend at the time said I didn't recommend going, saying that the situation was so critical. And I thought if I didn't have a meeting, then the teacher would notify me, but if I didn't, then I should go. Then I went there to see. I felt the atmosphere is particularly tense. Went to the house, everyone is wearing protective clothing, but that is disposable. They are wearing the kind of blue, and then wearing masks, glasses, gloves. I went into the doctor's office. No one was there. I said I can't come here for nothing. I'll go to the ward to copy a medical record, go to the ward to copy a medical record, and then go. Then the teacher said you can't leave the mask on, so if you're okay, you should go. Then I saw this, so I left, and on my way home I thought, oh, I'm not infected, am I? I thought I should go around on the road and not bring the SARS virus home. I walked home and didn't dare to take the bus. Later that night, I felt a little cold, but I didn't care. I was very alert. I thought, no, if I get infected, I can't infect my family. I have to find a place to isolate. I was sleeping with my sister. I then went directly to our unit to quarantine. I told our director that I had a fever, and then a special room was set aside for me. Then I gave my own medical advice at the hospital and stayed there for observation. At the beginning, no one was afraid. My symptoms were not typical. My temperature was not very high, not more than 38 degrees. But then the fever didn't go down, and then the leaders started to report it, saying that you must talk to the hospital about the situation, and that the CDC must be called in. At that time, almost every day to check the blood. It was April. I still wear a down jacket, wearing a mask. I went to the laboratory in front of a bunch of people. I said sorry, let me check first. I left. Then a woman said, "Why do you have to check it?" I said I had a fever, and all of a sudden, a space was vacated. I was so angry and funny at that time, and then went to check it out. At that time, the atmosphere began to be tense, and then the night fever injection. A nurse came in actually. We usually have a good relationship. I came to her to talk. I said, "You are on duty." She did not dare to breathe, not to mention talking. You know what, I thought, how could this happen? After the injection, I thought, I'll never talk to you again. It's normal, who's not afraid to die? And I was just getting worse and worse, just a fever that wouldn't go away, and then a cough. But you always cough, you will feel very tired. In fact, coughing is quite energy consuming. I was already tired and sore on both sides of my shoulder muscles. We had to be transferred to a hospital that had isolation conditions. But other hospitals were full. And then they said there was a hospital in Fengtai district that had this condition, and said you could be transferred, but we didn't have a car to pick you up, you had to come by yourself. Our hospital had only one ambulance, and the director said that after using this ambulance, the ambulance could not be used. The director was so angry and anxious that he said, "No, I will transfer you by motorcycle." Then I cried. And I said, "No, director, I don't want to die here if I can't get out of here." At that time was a bit desperate. Then the next day the director said, "Pack up our things to transfer to the hospital," said Fengtai Hospital lent us an ambulance. When I was transferred to the hospital, it was a long corridor, divided into many small rooms, and it directly separated me to the innermost one person to one room. At that time, I don't know if it was because I was the heaviest, it put me in a single room, in the innermost room, and I still remember that I was probably the only medical staff in there, and the nurses there were very nice to me. Then the director came every day and encouraged me, saying that you have spent many, many days, hang in there, this disease is self-healing, saying that you may soon be cured. That's how I was encouraged every day. But it didn't work. My condition just got worse and worse. They also started using adrenal corticosteroids at that time.
Adrenocorticotropic hormones, which reduce the inflammatory response, have many side effects, the most serious of which is the inhibition of bone growth, leading to osteoporosis.
At that time, the maximum amount of 600 milligrams twice a day was very high, but the shadows in my lungs did not go away, and the symptoms did not decrease. The hospital finally ran out of options, and I ended up with white lungs and flaky shadows on both lungs, so they suggested I be transferred to another hospital. That night, I was transferred at night. We were transferred after 12 p.m., and when we got there, the elevators were stopped, and there was no one there. I was transferred to the 3rd or 4th floor, and then they called and said that the patient had to go up by himself, and we couldn't come out to pick him up, because it was isolated. Then, I got out of the ambulance and couldn't walk a few steps, just like running 800 meters. At that time, I didn't know that it was called dyspnea, so I thought, I'll catch my breath and walk 2 or 3 steps. Then the doctor saw my condition, picked me up and sent me to the ward. At that time, I thought it was too dangerous, too close. Even if he was wearing an isolation suit and I was wearing a mask, there was still a risk of infection. Finally, he handed me over safely and put me on the hospital bed. I couldn't say thank you or anything at that time, and I didn't ask his name, but I found out later that the doctor's name was Shu. That doctor really touched me. I was in a big ward, very big. There must be 5 or 6 people living in it, I think, at that time. The kind of hypoxemia, fever for so many days, it is not very clear in the head, I think. I wanted to go to the bathroom, but I couldn't hold on and fainted. Although fainted, the ears can still hear, that is, you cannot move, and then listen to them shout. Then they saw that my condition was too serious, so they pushed me to a single room with a hospital bed, and then I don't know how long I was in a coma, but I was unconscious for a few days. During that time, I also called my family and colleagues, and many of my classmates who I hadn't talked to in years called and texted me, just to encourage me in various ways. During this period of time in the hospital, I think it was the happiest period of time for me since I got sick, and I think it was the best period of time for me, that is, I was cared for by people, and I felt that the outside world was also very beautiful. I heard all the positive things, all the people working together to fight SARS, and that was all I heard every day. But I knew I couldn't go outside. I looked down at the window every day, and sometimes I waved hello to the staff who were off duty. And the food outside was not brought in, and the families were not allowed to bring it in. Because I know the doctor at the hospital there, I sent food in through his name. My mom and the girls sent cucumbers and tomatoes and all kinds of fruits, and later on, because the coughing got better every day, and the breathing was not so difficult, mainly because the fever was gone, the shadows slowly went down, and the symptoms were improving. Then I remember I had a very good friend who called me every day, and the first thing I said to her every day was, "I feel better than I did yesterday." Soon I could get out of bed, and at that time I got out of bed and walked around and looked at my bedside card, and I had SARS, and I remember the feeling very clearly, and I thought, I've got it. Then the doctor said I should be discharged in the middle of May, and I didn't feel any more symptoms, and I didn't have a fever anymore. At that time, I was probably the last one to be discharged from the hospital with a good attitude, so they discharged me as the last patient. I was discharged from the hospital on April 20th and discharged on June 1st, less than 2 months. At that time, my mother and sister came to pick me up. There were reporters, but no one interviewed me, but I did have a few shots, just very happy and excited. I had to be isolated for a week, and I couldn't live with my family, but I felt relaxed, at ease, and warm when I came home. After we were discharged from the hospital, we had contact with our former patients, and it was September 2003. Other patients from other hospitals, who had SARS, were also found to have osteonecrosis. I said, "I'm so young, and I don't have any symptoms. How can I have osteonecrosis?" The patient said, "You should get it checked out. There is no harm in getting it checked out." So I went for an MRI, and the results came back in a few days. I was busy at work and didn't have time to get the results, so my family did it for me. I remember when I came home that day, I felt a very depressing atmosphere in the house, and I said, "Is there something wrong?" My mother said, "Look at it yourself." Then I took the results and saw a septic necrosis. I didn't feel anything at that time, so I said it was fine, and I said I was still so young, and the test was so early, maybe I could still get well. In fact, that's what I said at that time, because I knew that osteonecrosis was irreversible, and I learned in school that osteonecrosis is irreversible, and that it is an undead cancer. Then I started to seek medical attention, and the doctor said you must have femoral head necrosis. I said, "Is there a more aggressive way?" He said no. He said you should go home in a wheelchair and wait for a joint replacement. The doctor said that without any warmth, there was no hope at that time, and I cried out with tears in my eyes, standing on the street, hugging and crying, you know. I found out that not only my femoral head was necrotic, but all my joints were necrotic, except for my elbow joint. In 2006, I was going to get married to my boyfriend. We went shopping in the mall, and suddenly the pain was so bad that I couldn't walk. I was sweating. My boyfriend carried me back. I couldn't even walk. Later, an X-ray revealed that the bone had collapsed. The head of the femur had collapsed. We met before SARS. He was also a doctor, and we had a good relationship during SARS. I thought he didn't leave me during SARS. I thought he wouldn't either, and we shouldn't have any problems. In fact, after my femoral head necrosis, he never left me, and his family also said that they would not leave you, so don't worry, just get well. In the first few years, there were no symptoms, walking with crutches or anything, no symptoms. So I think he may not feel anything, but after the femoral head collapsed in 2006, he had surgery, which failed and became infected, and then removed the implant and refleshed it, and suffered a lot at that time. After 6 months of treatment in the hospital, he could not take care of himself, he could not do any work, and he could not go out with him to play like a normal person. At that time just met him, the most passionate feelings, he is to see you once a week or something, and then meet once a week, and then meet for a short time, he left, and at that time I went to the doctor to follow up, all by myself. Suddenly one day I looked back and thought, my boyfriend has and does not seem to be similar, I think he may have left me. But you have known for so many years, there are feelings there is also reluctance, there is also embarrassment, so you cannot say break up, and then I must also have emotions, that time the phone always quarrel, a phone call anyway, I am not good, and then I said angrily, in this case, then we break up. Then he was very anxious and very fast, and said to me that this is what you said. I said yes, I said, you do not regret, anyway, that means that this is what you said, we start from today to break up. In fact, the day of the breakup he also cried, he said that he was under a lot of pressure, had no choice, the family side of the people do not agree. I was able to think about it at that time, I just thought the big deal was to live alone, just miss the good things before, is the good things that once brought you, you also had a relationship, the process is very good, I feel very sweet, not everyone has such a good experience, I just remember the good things we both had on the line. After all these years, I think I have been very relieved of him.
More than 300 people in Beijing were later diagnosed with SARS, nearly half of whom were healthcare workers like Wu who contracted the disease at work. Wu has since undergone 4 surgeries to replace 2 hip joints and is now able to move around almost normally.
The other day I was thinking, I thought if I had to do it all over again and I knew there were SARS patients in Beijing, what would I do? But I think I would still do my internship at Peking University People's Hospital, and I should still go to work normally, but I probably wouldn't go to that study session that day, not that stupid.
You're watching MetaNights, and I'm Anchor Loku. Thank you for listening and we will see you next time.